Hi. Today we're going to be talking about how to get into residency. This program is designed for osteopathic medical students, typically first, second, or third year, who wants to be able to improve their skills to get into the residency program of their desire. My name is Dr. Robert Hasty. I'm the Dean and the Chief Academic Officer of OCOM. I've spoken to thousands of medical students across the country about how to get into residency, and hopefully I've added some value, and hopefully I'll add some value in today's program. So the list I'm going to give you is the top 10 best pieces of advice for getting into residency program. I'll also put a link into the show notes about a separate article that actually goes through these type of things so you can actually go into a little bit more depth and also click on some references. And so my objectives for this program is to place into GME programs that have a high satisfaction with. I want you to employ the top 10 advising strategies in terms of GME placement. And also, I want you to enjoy the process of getting into graduate medical education. This is probably the most challenging job interview you've ever been into. And hopefully this program helps you try to navigate some of that. Now, the good news is that there's a ton of great references out there. So certainly these are the references. We'll put some more in the show notes. And of course, I love this picture. This is my residency program graduating class, class of 2003 from Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami Beach. People say there's another Mount Sinai up in New York, but we always said the real Mount Sinai is in Miami Beach. But the opportunities that you'll get through a residency program, especially one that you love and one that's going to train you well, will set up your entire career for success and happiness and joy. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would in a second. It was an incredible experience, and I wish you the same. Now, this is the good news slide. So if you look at the most recent year, 2024, 99% of all graduates of osteopathic medical schools seeking residency programs have a job on July 1st, their residency position on July 1st. As far as I can tell, this is the highest job placement of any degree in America. I haven't been able to find another one. If you do, please, please let me know about it. But this is great. Now, of course, there's two things here. 1% that they don't get into the graduate medical education program that exact year. So you certainly don't want to be in the blue there. And you also want to make sure that you're a happy green, right? You want to be one of those folks that gets into residency and that's happy with your decision process. And hopefully we'll help through some of these. Now, I can tell you my first piece of advice is to do well on the boards. And this has changed a little bit over the years because used to the stakes for Comlex USA Level 1 and USMLE Step 1 was so important determining if you had an interview for a residency program. Now that they become pass or fail, I can tell you there has been a shift between doing well on Level 1 on the boards and doing well on the Level 2 of the boards, because you still get that score for Level 2 currently. And having that Level 2 score helps the program directors to determine academically how well you're doing. But I can tell you, you never want to have a failure on the Comlex. Failing the Comlex Level 1, it can be a challenge getting into residency, even with one failure. And I can tell you, as a former program director, we look at those things and we call those red flags. So you really want to do well on the Comlex USA Level 1, Level 2. If you decide to take the USMLE Step 1, Step 2, obviously you have to do well on those as well. Now, I can tell you these are historically the top 5 factors of getting into residency program from a few years ago. Now, they don't quite report it out the same way as they used to, and certainly some of these things are changing right now. So Comlex USA Level 1, USMLE Step 1, I doubt it's going to be the number one determinant of getting into residency programs in the future. I think what's number 4 on this list is Comlex USA Level 2 and USMLE Step 2. I think that will actually, is actually probably getting up higher on the top 5 reasons why folks get selected for interviews. And I can tell you, as a former program director on the ARAS, the Electronic Residency Application Service, applied to residency programs through, it's incredibly easy for us to filter as a program director, formally as a program director. It's so incredibly easy for the programs to filter through. And when you're looking at potentially hundreds or even thousands of applicants, it's a way to kind of, determine who you want to interview, especially when you have a limited number of interview spots. I can tell you letters of recommendation, also very important. We'll talk about that. The third thing on here is MSP, stands for Medical Students Performance Evaluations, also called the Dean's Letter. Historically, it was called Dean's Letter. Nowadays, everybody still calls it the Dean's Letter, but it's supposed to officially be the MSPE. And it's important for you as a medical student to determine what's in your Dean's Letter or your MSP from your medical school. So try to get that information. I know one institution that, they the students sometimes don't realize till their fourth years that all of their third year evaluations on all of their rotations are actually submitted as part of their dean's letter. And so you'd probably want to know that before the rotation starts so that you actually, you know, um, you know, take action accordingly. Of course, we talked a little bit about the level two and step two. And the fifth is actually the personal statement. I won't spend too much time talking about this, but I can tell you as a former program director, it's amazing how many applications I opened, and it would have the personal statement, and it'll say, the reason why I want to apply to this medical school is, and of course, the person didn't even update to residency programs. They used the same personal statement that they did in medical school, and, and as a program director, that's, you know, sort of a sign that the person doesn't really pay attention to details. And, I've heard things where they didn't even, they accidentally clicked on the wrong file. So, make sure that you have an updated personal statement and that you're using it. So that's to get into an interview. And by the way, there have been, correlates between actually getting matched into a residency program based upon the board scores for level one. And the same is probably going to be true for level two in terms of, what we'll find out from, the data over the years. Now, this is also a moving target, is the competitiveness of residency programs. One historical aspect that we had for the competitiveness of residency programs was the average scores that actually got into the residency programs. And you can tell there is definitely a correlation between, say, for instance, orthopedic surgery, which is the most competitive in America, has been for years. I don't see that changing anytime soon. To say, something like family medicine, which is less competitive. Now, of course, these things change over time. On here you see psychiatry actually lower scores, and historically that has been a little less competitive to get into, say, other residency programs, but that's changed in the last few years. Psychiatry has actually gotten very competitive since COVID, and of course, some of that's lifestyle influence. It's income influenced, I think, and of course, psychiatry is becoming much more competitive. In fact, psychiatry is probably more competitive to get into than emergency medicine is nowadays. And in fact, I see that there's probably some good evidence of that. So anyway, it's an interesting correlate to what to look into. Now, my second piece of advice is to make your specialty choice by January 1st of your third year. I started Idaho's first medical school, the Idaho College of Osteopathic Medicine. And in Idaho, they really take potatoes very seriously. And so, each year at January 1st, they would actually drop a big potato. Now I'm in Florida. I think they actually drop a big orange or something on January 1st. But my recommendation to you is to have your decision on what you want to do in terms of specialty uh, made by January 1st of your third year. Now, of course, you think about that and you say, well, I haven't even done all my rotations yet, my core rotations. How do I know? And I can tell you, it is a tough decision, right? Because you don't necessarily have had those in-depth experiences in each residency or each rotation to understand what you really want to do. But if you don't do it, have to start thinking about your audition rotations or your gold months during fourth year, and you also have to think about logistics and if you're a couples match. All these type of things play into things. So you really need to make your decision. Then you can actually start researching individual programs. Look at geography, places that you want to live. Very, very important. I'll tell you, I love this quote from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I think it's still available on Netflix. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. And I think that same thing is true with getting into residency. So it doesn't matter if you're a first-year student, a second-year student, third-year student. You have to think about the big picture. And the big picture is getting into a residency program that's going to set up your career as a physician. And so I think that these conversations, thinking about these things throughout your career, super important. Number three is to do a reality check. So we talked a little bit about the competitiveness of each residency program, and I mentioned things like orthopedic surgery is the most competitive residency program in America. Well, if you fail, the COMLEX level one, fail the boards, academically you're very weak in the class, or for instance, your school, publishes the rank in your dean's letter and you're, bottom of the class, chances are you're probably not going to get in those super competitive residency programs. And you have to be able to think, what are my alternatives? What do I want to take a look at, say another specialty, and maybe orthopedics may not be in the cards for me, but maybe I'd be very happy as say a family physician or, some other specialty that maybe is a little bit less competitive than the one you're looking at. So really have reality checks. I don't say this, I don't want to destroy anybody's dreams, always go for the brass ring. You always want to your reach should always exceed its grasp, or what's a heaven for. But I strongly recommend that you don't want to be in the 1% that doesn't have a residency program, and you have to be realistic with your opportunities out there. So this is one surrogate for the competitiveness of residencies for osteopathic medical students that were matched. And on here you have interventional radiology is number 1, you have orthopedic surgery is number 2, neurosurgery is 3, dermatology is number 4, general surgery is number 5. I don't know, maybe if they publish this soon, maybe psychiatry is maybe on the top 5 list. I don't know. And of course, IR is a little unique because they don't have that many residency programs and things like that. So that's one surrogate, but you can kind of see these. These are the things that are probably not a surprise to anybody watching this video. Number 4 is your letters of recommendation. It's the second most important factor for selecting prospective students for interviews. And you really want to have a very positive letter of recommendation. You also have to be careful who you ask for letters of recommendation because they're blinded, right? Because you don't get a chance to see your letter. In fact, you waive your rights and then they submit it through the ARS portal. And so you want to make sure whoever you ask is going to give you a positive letter. I have had situations in the past where I get a letter of recommendation, which basically is a negative letter for that applicant. And, it tells me 2 things. Number 1, maybe it's not a good applicant. And number 2 is maybe there's a self-awareness issue that the applicant doesn't know who they're asking or what their audience is when they're asking for a letter of recommendation. So it's important to kind of know your audience when you do ask for a letter of recommendation. I'll tell you that one of the best medical students I've ever had, his name was Jeff Brown. This guy was just incredible. He asked me before the residency program or before the rotation as a third-year medical student. He told me, he said, you want to be the best medical student I'd ever had, which it's a little bit like a house of God moment, right? If you've ever read by Samuel Shim, you kiss the ground they walk on if the medical student doesn't double the amount of work that you have, right? And so, I said, that's great. He says, can you give me feedback each week? And I said, of course, that's what I was supposed to do anyway. And he says, if there's anything that I'm not doing that doesn't make you think I'm the best medical student you've ever had, will you give me that feedback so I can correct and get better by the end of the month? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. He says, and if I am the best medical student you ever had, would you write me a letter of recommendation? I said, oh, if you're the best medical student, of course I'm going to write you a letter of recommendation, right? And so at the end of the first week, he came to me and he said, what can I improve upon? And I say, your history of present illnesses can be a little bit longer. So for the next week, he's written a real long history of present illnesses. Second week, he comes around and he's really good. He says, well, what can I improve upon, this week? And I said, well, your family histories are a little, anemic. Can you bolster up that? He's like diagramming like genetic family trees and stuff like that, really intense things. And it was, incredible. Third week's rolling around and, I'm like running out of stuff because he's really such a great student. And, he asked me, and well, I said, well, I just read this article that if a physician smiles, when they're with the patient is more, closer with the physician and they trust the physician and enhances the patient relationship. So like the following week, he's sitting there smiling all the time and everything like that. And then of course the fourth week, he really was probably one of the best medical students I've ever had. And so he asked me to write a letter of recommendation, which I said, of course. And so in the article or in the letter, I said, this is the best medical student I've ever worked with. And, I was in the doctor's lounge, physician's lounge a couple months later, and I was talking to some of the other attendings, and we were talking about this, medical student, and they all wrote the same letter, like he was the best medical student they ever worked with and everything. He'd done the same exact thing on them, so feel free to try that if that's helpful. Number 5 is to apply to as many, plenty of programs, include safety programs. And, the average osteopathic medical student applies to about 9 osteopathic medical schools. I can tell you that the numbers actually go up much higher, especially depending on the, the program that you're applying to or the specialty. So, say for instance, people that apply for general surgery, sometimes they'll apply up to 100 residency programs. Sometimes, if they're applying to family medicine, especially stronger candidates, they don't have to apply that many. Maybe they're only applying for 20 or 30 programs, and so that changes a little bit. And so you might want to, think about applying for more programs. Now, of course, there's cost associated with applying for more programs, but it does increase your risk of being, or increase your chance of being called for interviews and those type of things. And I can tell you that, nope. And I can tell you that there's something called signaling now that's actually kind of taken off. That if you have a certain number of signals per specialty, so you can actually signal programs. How many that you want. So your top programs that you would send signals to, so they knew that you actually really like that program because you sent a signal to that program. And then you have to make choices if you really like that program. So you hit the signals, and of course it's different for each specialty, and something for you to consider nowadays. Number 6 is to plan for interview season. Nowadays almost all interviews are virtual. You don't see as many in-person interviews, but you still have to plan for the logistics. You have to plan for the logistics of the interviews, when you can interview and how many that you're interviewing, that it's not interrupting the rotation that you're on, and of course policies of your school interviewing. So you have to kind of consider that. And also, for the audition or golden months, you also have to plan about the finances of actually going to a place and living with it for a month and those type of things. So it's important. Now, golden months are those audition months where you actually go to that residency program, you check it out, you spend time. I can tell you they're called golden months for a reason. You really want to listen very, very carefully to that program, find out if you really like the program. Now, certainly spend some of your golden months at places that you really think are your tier programs. You might want to consider doing one or two or more safety programs for your golden months. And who knows, you may go to what you consider a safety program, you get there, and you fall in love. The attendings are nice, the residents are nice, and they're happy. And vice versa, you might actually go to a program where you think you're really interested, and you get there, and all the residents are saying, this place is toxic, don't come here. You might want to listen. And it kind of reminds me of Franklin's famous quote, keep your eyes wide open before marriage and half shut afterwards. And I think the same is true for a residency program. Before you get into there, you want to know as much about that residency program as possible, find out, if it's really a good fit for you, and, if it's not, walk away. But if it is the right fit for you, probably, don't be super hypercritical the whole time you're there, and try to focus on making it a great experience once you're there. Number 8 is to prepare for the interviews. And I can tell you, over the years, I actually have found medical students more prepared for their interview than residents. And there's a list. If you just Google it, list of commonly asked questions. And so, as a former program director, I'd ask folks, why do you want to go in this specialty? Why do you want to come to this program? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? The very common, simple programs or questions. And I can't tell you how many times where I've had folks come in, they fly out of town for an in-person interview, or I guess nowadays would be Zoom or something like that, and they get there, and I say, well, why do you want to come here? Or why do you want to go in the specialty? And they look at me like I have 3 heads because they hadn't even thought about their responses. And so it's important to kind of think about how you want to respond to those questions. You got to know your own story, and it has to be authentic. And if you do have some academic challenges, like you failed to get into a residency program, or I'm sorry, you failed a rotation, or you failed a course, or you had to repeat a year, to kind of think about what your authentic answers will be for those things, and develop your story, who you are, what your interests are, those type of things, because that's what they'll be asking. Most medical schools, or I should say some medical schools, do interview OSCEs like we do here at OCOM, and that's important to take advantage of. To have somebody ask you those questions, make sure that you're prepared. Look at the feedback that you get, and then try to improve yourself based upon that feedback. Number 9 is to maximize your interview offers. Now, I mentioned that you have the signaling where you get a certain number of tokens, signals for different specialties. And you want to send those to your top programs, the programs that you really, really want to go to, because, it's a little bit like the dating theory. People love those who love them. And if you're showing the love to the program, they like you. And then you also have to have those conversations too that, or be prepared if somebody asks you, why didn't you give us a signal? You know, I mean, are you really serious about that program? And that may come up on, interviews or, just when you're talking to different programs. Now, you also want to make sure that you have, reasonable, non-stalking, good, positive communication with folks like the coordinators and the program director, because that'll help you get into residency programs. You also want to make sure that you have a reasonable number of safety programs. You may want to apply to programs that are affiliated with your medical school because there is some comfort level of people they know, or especially if they like your medical school and things like that. They have positive feelings for it. It may help you get in. And then you want to maximize your audition program. So don't throw away your golden months on programs that you don't really have any serious thoughts about going to. Certainly use your networking circles. Try to network with as many people as you possibly can, and work those connections that you have. Number 10 is to strategically rank programs. And number one piece, or one of my most important pieces of advice, is never rank a program that you don't want to go to as a resident, because it's a 3 to 5 year commitment, and it can be miserable if you're in a place that you're not happy with. So just you know, it's probably better to go in the scramble than to get obligated contractually for a program that you do not feel comfortable going to. Either it's a geographic issue with that area that you really don't like, the quality of the program's not your satisfaction, or it's some toxicity that you don't know about. So very, very important to consider these things. And remember, it's a commitment. Once you get matched to the program, you have a commitment to sign that agreement. So you really have to be very, very careful about strategically ranking programs. So with that, I invite any of you to contact me. My email is rhasty@ocom.org. Happy to answer any questions. I wish you all happiness, success in your careers, and I hope you get to the residency program that you like.